Before we jump into my mixing template, I want to share with you something very special. If you have not picked it up already, I have written up a free PDF gear guide for beginners in audio, what you need and how much it costs. In this gear guide, I've written out everything you're going to need to start recording yourself or start recording your clients in your brand new studio. I give you a bunch of different options of what you can get, different price points, what you need, how much it costs. Again, it's absolutely free. I want you to go pick it up. Go to www.mixwithjacob.com/gear guide. Let's jump into the mix template that I use on a day-to-day basis. First, I'm going to import a fresh one so you can see what it looks like kind of from zero. I'll explain all the plugins, all the routing, kind of my philosophy behind the template, and then I'll open up a session where it's actually being used and I'll kind of demonstrate how I've routed stuff. And let's jump into it. Let me create a session here. Let's call this mixing. Let's go create. Let's put this on the desktop for now. I don't ever recommend creating sessions on your desktop, but for the sake of this video, I will do it. So from this blank Pro Tools session, if you've watched some of my past template videos, you know I have a very quick method of importing templates. You could either create a template file for Pro Tools, or you can simply do import session data, go and find the mixing template, which is right here, Mix Template 2022, double click on it. And in this case, I'm gonna grab absolutely everything. In some cases, I don't need all of the tracks. Like for example, let's say there's no vocals on a track, I'm just mixing an instrumental track. I won't grab all the vocal buses, but in this case, I'll grab everything. So I just select all. Do not import. I don't want to import any audio if there is any, which I doubt there is. Let's grab that. Now, first things first, it's quite the extensive template. I have a mix bus, I have a mix bus trim, and a master fader with some plugins already ready to go that stay on that I mix into. Then I have a bass bus with some bass parallel processing, which then goes into the mix bus. And then I have a drum bus, which is like a main drum bus. Within that drum bus, I have two parallel tracks that work together, plus a couple other parallel drum tracks like, you know, parallel compression, parallel saturation, parallel kick drum, parallel snare drum, which I don't use all the time, depends what the production needs. Then I have a music bus, which has a main, and then it has two parallel music buses, which work together into the main music bus, which then goes into the master bus. Hopefully I haven't lost you yet. Then I have a all vocals bus, which has a VCA fader to control level of all the vocals going into the bus. I have a back vocal bus, and I also have a bunch of vocal effects and reverbs, not specifically for vocals, but kind of designed this way. At the very end of my session, you'll just see there's a bunch of effects tracks kind of ready to go. They're all inactive for the moment because I don't want to use any processing power if I'm not using the reverb. So as I want to use a certain reverb, I'll reach for it, I'll activate it, I'll make a send, and then it gets processed with the reverb in a parallel track. So I've got the fresh mix template open here. We're gonna take a look. So I have, as you can see, they're all separate with kind of color coding. So everything's simple. Visually, I know where everything is. Super easy to navigate for me because I've gotten used to the colors and stuff. It might be a little overwhelming to look at the moment, but let me go through it and explain everything that's going on. It's important you understand that I work in the top-down mixing method. So I like to have plugins on my mix bus and master bus, and I mix through them from the very beginning. Those plugins are there with settings that I like from the start. It might seem counterintuitive, but believe me, I get to my results much faster with the top-down mixing method. Here, you can see I have a mix trim, which is essentially a master fader. Just in case I'm coming in too hot into the mix bus later on in the mix, I could just trim it down a little bit and readjust the mix bus. I have a mix bus track, which at the moment just has a 1073. Then I have a master on the monitor left-right output of the mix bus, which has all my final mastering processing. And I'll show you all the plugins in a minute. I have the all bass bus with the three parallels I was mentioning before. I have the drums main with the two parallel drum buses and some other parallel drum stuff that doesn't get used often, but it's there in case I want it. All these four tracks at the bottom here get routed into these two drum buses. These get mixed together and routed into the drums main, which then gets sent to the mix bus. Still following? Next, I have the music bus, which is a main auxiliary track and then two separate parallel buses. So all my music stuff gets routed into these two buses. They get blended together and get sent into the music main. Next, I have the all vocals bus with a lead bus as well, which I end up not using. I don't actually do anything on it, but it's essentially there in case I need to apply any processing before hitting the main bus, or if I need to trim levels down before hitting the all vocals bus. It's just kind of there as a safety. I have this lead VCA, which doesn't get used often, but again, it's an in-case measure, in case I need to group all my lead vocals together, assign them to a VCA and trim them up or down or do automations. It's very handy to have, so it's there in case I need it. If you watched my vocal signal chain video, part 2, I went into some of the vocal effects tracks that I have here. Now these are essentially empty mono audio tracks. And in my workflow, as I'm mixing a vocal, if I hear a certain moment that needs like an explosion of effects or delay or whatever, I could just copy that clip of that vocal, slide it up to one of these vocal effects tracks and apply the processing full wet so that I have like a parallel track with only that one vocal clip that has the effects on it. So it's kind of a workflow thing that I like. These vocal effects tracks get routed straight into the all vocals main bus. Next, I have the all backs, which is any back vocals, harmonies, dubs usually go in there as well, where I could process them a little bit separately than the lead vocal if I wanted to. Next, I have the effects bus, which is basically anything like risers or, you know, like, I don't know, vocal samples, like little textural things inside the mix sessions that I'll get from a producer. I'll usually put it in there, like that's like little risers, you know, like white noise things, whatever. It's a bus specific for those little things in case I need to touch them all together as a whole. There's a little bit of saturation on the bus. We'll get into that after. And then at the bottom here, you see a bunch of effects ready to go. They're all inactive for the moment. And as I use these, like for example, my vocal parallel chains are all here. So I'll send my vocal stuff to these parallels and all these effects go straight into the all vocals bus. The reason I have so many of these effects inactive is because I rather save the computer processing and then as I need an effect, I'll activate it, throw the vocal into it, and then I'm good. And I don't necessarily just use this for vocal. Maybe I have an acoustic guitar track and I want to use a bit of, you know, the ambient reverb in there, whatever. I just make a send to those effects tracks and those go straight to the all vocal bus and we're all good. So that's essentially a full breakdown of my mix template. Let me go through some of the plugins I have on here. So again, top-down mixing method. So on the mix trim, I have a few things kind of ready in case I want to do any automation or anything specific. I have the Drummer 73, which is essentially a compressor slash effects processor. It does like kind of cool things sometimes on the sides, adds width. There's this air knob that's really cool. So I kind of keep that on the mix bus if ever I want to try it or use it. I have the Waves Center plugin, which I'll use sometimes just to automate explosions. Like in the chorus, maybe I'll automate the sides up a little bit in the choruses so it feels a bit wider. So I kind of keep that there in case I need to do any moves like that. On the actual mix bus, I have this 1073 that's always on. It has like a little bit of a smiley face curve that I leave on at all times and I mix into this. Again, top-down mixing. I mix into plugins right from the start. And over the course of the mix, I'll maybe modify it if I need to. If I need add a little more bass, maybe I'll go tweak that 60 hertz, or if there's too much, maybe I'll take it down. So that's kind of always there. And then right below it, I have a few compressors that I keep there as options, as like, you know, a bus comp. So I have the Waves SSL bus compressor, which is always a win. I have this Melda Turbo Comp, which has a lot of different kind of emulations of like vintage compressors. That's really cool. So I kind of like to keep that on there in case I want to use it. And I kind of flip through some presets and see what I like. There's the 33609 by UAD, which is a really great compressor. That's also there in case I want to use it. And then I have the actual SSL native plugin for the stereo bus comp. A little bit lower on that same track, I have some virtual tape machines in case I want to add a little bit of flavor. Sometimes mixing into these is really nice for certain styles of music. So I like to keep them there. They're inactive when I start the mix, but they're there ready to go with a setting that I already like on the track. So if ever I just want to use it, I just turn it on. It's already got a setting that I like and I'm good to go. The key to this template for me is the workflow. I like to have things there ready to go so that at any point, if I'm inspired for something, I have plugins that I already have like a setting that I like. All the routing is already done. The plugins are already on the tracks. I just have to turn it on and I get a result really quickly. On the master bus, again, top down, I have the God Particle by Jason Joshua. It does like multi-band compression and expansion, as well as it has a very powerful EQ module. The limiter is kind of nice. I don't use it, so I just use the input knob to drive the plugin a little bit and then the output to bring it down because it does add quite a bit of gain. It just kind of gives a lot of energy to the mixes, so I leave that on at all times and I mix into it. I have the Oxford Inflator to give a little bit of punch to the mix. The Golfos Master, which has all the settings at 0 for the moment. The audio will pass through from the very beginning, and then at the end, maybe I'll do some little tweaks if I need to, otherwise I'll take the plugin off. I have the Precision Maximizer, which again adds a little bit of weight and saturation to the mix. I have the Golden OTT. Right now, everything's set at 0. It's just the default setting, but at 0%, and at the end of the mix, if I feel it needs a little bit of brightening, a little bit of openness, I'll just put like a few percentages, like 5%, 6% is the sweet spot for this default preset. But it's not always on. I don't always use it, but it's there in case. I have the T-Rax Classic Clipper to shave some peaks off before the limiting at the very end. And then I have two separate limiters that work kind of in tandem. This does a little bit of limiting, and then the Pro L2 does a little bit harder limiting. And these kind of limiters with the clipper help me get my mixes super loud and still kind of transparent. Next, we have the all bass bus, which has true iron, which is a little bit of a saturation box. It's got this preset called bass thickener, which is really great, kind of adds a lot in that low kind of mid, like 100, 150. The R compressor, just to kind of control peaks in the bass so that I can kind of keep the bass consistent throughout the track. If it's a live bass, I might not use this because the dynamics is really important. If it's like a sub bass or like something in a pop track where it's just a really heavy bass and it has attacks, I'll maybe use this to trim out the attacks so that the bass kind of stays steady throughout the whole mix. Settings are kind of, they change. You know, I have the threshold that modifies a bit. I have a 3:1 ratio, so it's compressing not too hard. Relatively slow attack, so I can maybe let the peaks come through of the 808s, and then it trims right after, and then the release extra fast. And I'll sometimes switch between opto and smooth. Next on the all bass bus, I have a Pultec doing a big boost at 60 Hertz and a little boost at 3K. And again, I leave this on and I mix into it. So my decisions on my bass tracks individually are based on what's happening with these plugins. And oftentimes I get to my result way faster. Sometimes I take them off, sometimes I leave them on, sometimes I'll tweak them, but they're there, ready to go. Here I have a bass distortion track, a bass widening track, and a bass low end track. And these kind of all work in parallel with the actual bass tracks themselves to add kind of depth, saturation, and punch to the bass. On the distortion track, I have a Pro Q doing a bunch of filtering because I don't need to saturate what's already saturated. A lot of pop basses have already saturation. I just want to resaturate everything that's in the low end. So I do a kind of a heavy filter here. Then I have a black box on a preset 808 distortion fully wet, and then another filter after, filtering out everything that's not necessary. This is just the top end saturation that I want to keep, and I kind of blend that in with the original bass. Then I have the bass widening parallel track, which has the RC20 on like a little bit of a stereo wobble and some distortion. On the bass low end track, I just simply have an R bass fully blasted and I blend that in to kind of bring low end energy in case the bass is missing a little bit of fatness. Next in the template, I have the drums main, which has a stereo EQ with nothing on it at the moment, but it's there in case I need it. The only thing it's doing is mono maker, which basically takes everything that's under 80 Hertz at this setting. Everything that's under 80 Hertz gets forced into complete mono, which I think is really important for sub frequencies. If you have them too wide, it can really muddy up the mix. It's better to have that really centered down the middle and a little bit of stereo width. Otherwise, it's not doing anything. If I'm mixing the drums and I feel like the general drums are too bright or not bright enough, I could do little moves on this EQ, kind of just there, ready to go. Next, I have my two parallel drum buses that work together. I have one drum bus that's all saturation. This is kind of a trick that I caught from Jason Joshua and watching him mix. He does this thing where he stacks 8 NLS buses by waves, which is just basically saturation. He just stacks 8 of them in random orders, and that's kind of what I did. I added a bunch in random orders, and I used this to kind of create this super saturated, almost disgusting drum sound. And you blend that in with a normal, little bit saturated, but not dummy saturated drums, and it kind of makes this really nice, fat, kind of wide, saturated drum sound. It's really cool. I don't always use this. Sometimes it gets muted, but it's kind of cool to have that option. And then the bass bus right beside it, which is more the main bass bus, has a bit of an R bass at 80 Hertz to help the kick get some punch, a little bit of compression with the Shadow Hills, and a little bit of saturation again with the drum bus preset. Within the drum bus, I have a bunch of parallel tracks, which don't often get used. Basically just kick parallel with some heavy compression with an 1176, a snare compression parallel with a CLA 76, and 2 parallel drum compression and saturation buses. So I have one that's the Sansamp by Pro Tools and a 33609. And these are all affecting the sound heavily, and I just blend them in very slightly to kind of give my drums energy. Next on the list, hopefully you're still following, is the music bus. Now the main music bus, again, has an EQ with no processing on it. It's just there in case I need it. Next, I have the Chandler Curve Bender by UAD, and it's there, not doing anything. It's doing a little bit of harmonic distortion kind of on the music bus without even touching it. And then if I need to just add brightness or cut a little bit low end or something or filter, I have this ready as well as the other EQ that's on that bus. Next, I have 2 music buses that work kind of together to create the music bus sound. I have a all music, which is just has a little radiator, just a tiny bit of saturation, no noise. It's just giving me a little bit of beef on that track. And then parallel to that, I have the MV2, which is doing a lot of squashing. It's kind of taking that low end energy, bringing it up, taking the high end energy, bringing it down, kind of creating this sausage. And then right after the sausage, I have a little bit of black box saturation once again. And these two music buses kind of blend together into that music main bus. Next, I have my all vocal bus. And this actually contains all these lead vocal stuff and the back vocal stuff. So this is really like the global of all the vocals together in the song. Here I have some plugins kind of ready in case I want to do some processing. I have an R-Comp. I have the BX2098, excuse me, which is just basically this crazy EQ. And I usually just like to use it for a little bit of top end boost. And it has some really nice stereo width and saturation in it. I have the OTT, which I rarely use on the vocals, but I have it there in case at the end of the mix, I feel the vocals just need a little bit of a boost. I'll use this at like 2% depth just to add a little bit of energy. And then little secret weapon, the Eventide Ultra channel has this X-former, which is saturation. It imitates like an analog like transformer on the output. So I turn that on and I do a little bit of micro shifting too on the vocal bus. I find it adds a lot of energy. And if I need to do any final EQ moves, I'll do them here as well. All the vocals in the song also go through this ATR tape machine on the smooth vocal preset. It just soothes out kind of the stuff that gets added with a lot of digital processing. It kind of just makes it a little more warm. And as I was explaining earlier, I have a lead vocal bus, which is just there as a safety. This also has a sidechain vocal send, which I'll show you a little bit later with these effects. There's a VCA in case I need to do any level control. There's those vocal effects that I was talking about. That all goes into the all vocals main. Then there's the back vocal track, which has no processing on it, but usually it'll imitate a little bit what the lead vocal is doing with a little bit subtle differences with the back vocals, maybe some widening, maybe some filtering so they don't take up too much space. Next, I have the effects bus, which like I said before is more for like risers or little transition stuff in the song. They kind of get put in that bus with a little bit of saturation as well. Then if you watched my vocal processing part 2 video, I go through some of these parallel chains. I have parallel saturation for the vocal, parallel compression for the vocal. I have some parallel widening happening on this track, and I have a little bit of a delay here, which is a quarter note delay with 0 feedback. It's a little bit filtered. Sometimes I use this to create just kind of this glue in the track. Having that static delay kind of going back and forth is sometimes creates like this glue. Doesn't get used too often, but it's there in case I need it. And then I have all of these effects tracks, which I won't go into too much detail because it would take forever. This video is already going to be like 30 minutes long. I have a little bit of plate reverb with a pre-delay. I have a 140 plate. I have a AMS RMX by UAD on the ambient setting, which is a very, very nice reverb. I have this Lexicon 480 on the large wood room, which is really cool for perks and drums and stuff like that. The UAD Capital Chambers, of course, a beautiful reverb on vocals and pretty much anything that needs heavy vibes. Then there's a couple of little guys like the Valhalla Vintage Verb on the Hall preset, like the default one. Sounds fantastic. Then I have another AMS on the Hall C1 setting, which is a very kind of bright but short Hall. I have a spring reverb. This is a plugin chain actually by Chad Blake, so I kind of just copied it to try it one day. It's kind of cool. I don't use it all the time, but it's basically this light flanging that happens, and you could send it like a vocal bus to it to kind of create a little bit of movement on it. It's kind of nice. Like I said, don't use it often, but it's there in case I want. Then I have a bunch of tape delays. Some are panned left, some are panned right. More slap delays. I have a chorus using the Brigade chorus pedal from UAD. Then I have some delays. Echo Boy, H delay, Echo Boy again, H delay with a huge reverb after it. So essentially, like I was saying, these reverbs and delays and effects, they're all kind of there. They're all ready if I want to use them. At least I don't have to go find the plugin presets and blah, 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 because I've created these and they stay the same all the time. Maybe I'll modify them a little bit, but from the beginning, they already have a setting that I kind of like. Another thing worth mentioning too on these reverbs, if I turn this on, some of these reverbs have a R-Comp. What I like to do, if you've watched my video on how to create natural sounding reverbs, I like to sidechain my reverbs with the vocal so that when the vocal is singing, the reverbs are kind of ducked, and when the vocal stops, the reverb blooms kind of behind it. I do the same with delays, throws, stuff like that. So I'll put a link in the description and maybe a tag on the video so you can go see that, because it is very interesting. So that's pretty much it for the basic layout of the template. I hope you found some cool little nuggets in there that you're willing to try. Let me show you kind of what this template sounds like in action.